Hey everyone, and welcome back to 6++. I'm Lee, and today I'm going to be introducing a new segment to the channel we're calling Faction 101. In this series, we're going to be going through our favourite factions and covering off why we love them. And that will include lore, aesthetics, their tabletop performance, basically everything about the faction that we love. Today's video is going to be focused around why play the Thousand Suns in Warhammer 40,000. So, let's get right to it. To introduce the Thousand Suns then, and to give you a flavour of what they're about, I'm just going to read a small paragraph from the Codex that really sums up what they're all about. The Thousand Suns. They are the masters and the puppets of fate. They are the lords and yet the slaves of sorcery. Each seeks their own glory, their own power, utterly selfish in their selfless service of a cunning god. They are the Thousand Suns, the scion of the Cyclops, and through the riotous change they bring the immutable finality of death. Well, what more can you say? The first thing that tends to grab a new player is the immediate aesthetic appeal of an army. Now this can be the individual models or characters that are just well designed, sculpted, and look great on the tabletop, but actually extends out to the wider design choices for that faction. In the case of the Thousand Suns, there's obviously a very deeply Egyptian aesthetic to the models, and obviously the accompanying artwork. And now, whilst the range of the army isn't huge, you still get plenty of variety in your model selection. That means you can build a unique cabal of sorcerers to accompany your Rubric Marines and your Terminators and escort them, all with giant monsters, or with mutated spawn, or even the Demon Primarch Magnus the Red. If you collect the Thousand Suns, you'll never be short of painting and modelling challenges, and the army always appears striking on the tabletop thanks to the incredible detail of the sculpts. Now, one thing that's always appeals to me about a faction, if it's particularly prevalent in my local group. So for me, I don't like to go into a tournament or to a club and to see my faction overrepresented at these events. So whilst the Sons of Magnus right now are seeing a little bit of a popularity spike, generally they remain on the fringes of competitive play, which is a challenge I actually prefer. Lore-wise, the Warhammer 40,000 universe is such a big pull for so many hobbyists, and it can really help you to feel invested in the faction of your choice. Now, I've read a lot of the Black Library books about the Thousand Suns, just to help me further understand the faction, and this is something I'd always recommend to a new player, or even a more seasoned player if you can do it. The Thousand Suns are an integral part of the story of the Horus Heresy and subsequent events in the 41st millennium. And whilst it may seem trivial, having relevance on a galactic scale can actually help you feel as though your games of Warhammer 40k are actually of greater significance, which just feels great when you're playing the game. Alright, so let's look at the playstyle then. The Thousand Suns are essentially an elite army powered by a huge array of psychic support, perhaps more than any other faction in the game, maybe barring the Grey Knights. Generally, this means you'll probably have less models and units on the board than your opponent, although it is possible to bring something a horde if you were to choose to do so. What is great about the faction is that all of your characters, as well as all your basic troops and your Terminators, are all Psykers. Now this means you've got a huge amount of utility in your list design for all your various buffs, and there are a lot of them. Debuffs, there's a lot of those too, and of course those delightful mortal wounds. Oh yes, mortal wounds are one of the things that the Thousand Suns do better than just about anybody. And there are a number of ways to improve these even further that can actually compensate for a lack of things such as anti-armor shooting, and actually help you to free up any models that are locked in combat. You essentially get a phase a lot of armies don't get at all, which is fantastic. Coming further into that, if your army is entirely Thousand Suns, you'll gain the ability to use a new thing called the Kabbalistic Rituals. Now, I'll explain more about these in greater detail in future videos, but they are a new mechanic designed to help you dominate the psychic phase, and they certainly do just that. We're not quite as resilient as I'd like to be, so the Death Guard being a prime example of a really resilient army, but we do have some innate resilience. So almost everything in the book comes with a 5+ invulnerable save. Your Terminators and your Rubric Marines still get a +1 armor save versus damage 1 weaponry. That can make them very tanky versus small arms fire. Now conversely, you'll be putting a hail of AP2 bolter fire out, which will just shred enemy infantry. So it's a great matchup there. Now each Thousand Suns force can also be given a cult keyword. There are 9 cults you can select, and each offer a different psychic power that every single psychic unit in your army gets, apart from named characters. A relic and a warded trait. Now, some of these are incredibly powerful, Others are a little bit more flavourful, but each of them allows you to make your own warband, unique to how you'd like to play. And last but not least, the Thousand Sons are one of only 3 factions currently with access to a prime arc in Warhammer 40,000. And Magnus is always a spectacle on the tabletop. Firstly, he's a fantastic model, and secondly, he will strike fear into your opponent with his ability to cause a truly terrific amount of mortal wounds and his incredible close combat potential. Oh, and there's every single psychic power from the Thousand Sons book, excluding those cult powers. So 19 psychic powers, you say? How's that for flexibility? Now, no army is without weaknesses, and the Thousand Sons are no exception to this. Many of our models are very expensive for their points cost. Losing even a few Scarab Occult Terminators or Ruben Marines can greatly impact your ability to play the game, both in terms of the primary and secondary missions. Generally, this will mean that outscoring your opponent in the middle of the board is going to be a challenge, as you will lose units and have fewer than your opponent to trade with. I tend to find the Thousand Sons are very much a turn 3 onward sort of army. Usually by then we've had a little bit of a chance to grind our opponent down from a safe distance. As I say, we have a great psychic phase, a decent shooting phase, and a bit of a combat phase. So we do participate in all the phases. Additionally, while there are some Thousand Sons specific models, the army can actually be quite restrictive because of lack of access to other units seen in the Chaos range. That can make building this quite tricky, and that means we tend to lean on Forge World for sort of support for longer range firepower. I've said already that we are incredible psychers, and that brings a huge benefit to the army, but some factions are just as great at shutting us down. Sisters, Tyranids, or a simple Calexis Assassin can go a really long way in nullifying what we do best, and that can leave us exposed and deny us being able to play our game. Following on from that, in missions we can be easy targets for some opponents, and there are some very strong secondaries that work well against us. So things like Assassinate and Abhor the Witch score points very quickly against the Thousand Sons. It's very important to pick your army design to complement secondaries you think you can score well without putting too many eggs in one basket, because otherwise you will just become a little bit overwhelmed and stifled. So there we are. That is a short summary for all the reasons that I love the Thousand Sons. So if you think you would like to play Warhammer with beautiful Egyptian space wizards with guns, the Thousand Sons may be just for you as well. In the next video, I'm going to be covering off some beginners Thousand Sons tactics, including some simple do's and don'ts, some popular army lists, and generally how to get started off with the faction. That can include the buying and the painting as well. Until then, guys, just remember, Magnus did nothing wrong, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.